Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, I am Jane Gruba Chevalier, and I'm the Executive Director at the Concord Land Conservation Trust. And I just want to begin by thanking our membership for making this program, this talk this evening, and the work that we're going to be doing in the Wright Woods, doing trail construction, for making all of this possible. This evening's program is part of a workshop experience on trail building and maintenance. Matt's talk is part one, and we will be learning about the fundamentals of sustainable trail design and construction. For part two, we will be working alongside Matt and the AMC crew for a hands-on experience. If you have not yet signed up and wish to, you can go to concordland.org, or you can send me a message in the chat. And information, and I can circle back to you after, include your email in the chat, and then I can send you information afterward. The workday is this Sunday, June 12th. There are two sessions, one in the morning from 9 a.m. to noon, and the afternoon session is from 1 p.m. until 4 p.m. And a message, if you're already signed up, and if you subsequently sign up, I will be sending out a message ahead of time with some things to keep in mind. But it's now actually my pleasure to introduce Matt Moore. Matt has been working on trails since 2004. His 18-year career has been split between management roles and field work, and has taken him all across America. Matt has worked and led trail crews for the National Park Service in Yosemite, Mount Rainier, and Grand Teton. He has managed professional and volunteer trails programs for AMC throughout New England for a cumulative 6 years, and has a great passion for improving trails in his home state, woo-woo, Massachusetts, and his current home state of New Hampshire. He currently manages AMC's Professional Trail Crews, which in 2022 will total more than 100 weeks of work with professional crews from Valley Forge to Acadia. Matt is particularly keen on teaching the fundamentals of sustainable trail design and treating trails as infrastructure and trail work as a trade. And over to you, Matt.
Great, thanks, Jane. Thanks for having me, everybody. I'm pleased to be here. I'll jump right into it with I'll share my screen for this here PowerPoint presentation I have prepared. Yeah, my bio did cover at least my first slide or two, so that's good. So let's go into full screen here. Great, and thank you guys for taking the time in the evening to be with me and learn a little bit about trails. I did not, yeah, anyway. I'm a little bit of a Luddite, just a little bit, 10% Luddite. So I just blame any technical difficulties in advance on that. So let's get into it. This is my bio, which we just went over. It has been about half in the field and half administration. I feel like that's really been a benefit to me. You know, over the course of my career since 2004, an accidental career of sorts, I feel like I've observed our attitudes, our culture's attitudes towards trails change, and that notion of trail work as a trade, I think really does have some traction. I think there's room for a wide spectrum of trail work, but that certainly goes up to you know, masonry skills, skills that are akin to road building, but unique to their own, you know, set of trail standards. And so I want to try to share with this group some of the core technical specifications that we have in trail work, and that I've learned over the course of my career and tried to boil down into this presentation. So this is a notion that, you know, I've often heard in various different forms. You know, the trails are simple, and I think a result of this train of thought is that they shouldn't need much maintenance. They shouldn't need much money. And this is the way that the White Mountain Trail Network and trails throughout New England were designed, so to speak. You know, I know from the good oral tradition and history we have on AMC's Professional Trail Crew, which goes back to 1918. You know, I'm in contact with alumni from our trail crew from the 50s who've carried on a lot of great information. And, you know, from that, I know that the way that these trails were laid out in the early going was with string. Trail crew just meandering through the woods the most direct way from point A to point B, leaving a string in their wake and then removing the vegetation, and boom, there's your trail. And you know, the early trail builders, at least here in New England, weren't thinking of trails as infrastructure, weren't thinking like engineers. I think it was an assumption that proved costly, that trails don't require the same kind of thought and care that we might give to other public infrastructure. And of course, you know, throughout the West, we have trails that are historic and graded for pack stock that have proven more sustainable. Throughout Europe, there are old walking paths that utilize a lot of sustainable design principles. Here in New England, it feels like we're saddled with a few thousand miles of poorly designed trails. And it's not unique to us. You'll see these everywhere, but I do feel like part of this problem is with the assumption that began it all, which was that you don't have to think too hard about a trail. And it's amazing the amount of damage that just 2 feet multiplied over and over again can do. So when we think about trails as infrastructure, technical specifications guide best practices. It takes planning and budgeting, and the lack of forethought planning creates real consequences, real resource damage, erosion, you know, scarring visual impacts. So this picture that we have here, just to give you some context, this was one of my early trail crew projects, 2005 in the Blue Hills near Milton, Randolph area of Mass. And this was a staircase that we had constructed, and the rhetoric we were using at the time was, you know, rocks last forever. This is 100-year work. The trail crew had evolved from using wood sometime in the 70s, 80s to implementing rock. And it proved that rock was not the cure-all. A rock staircase that's put on a fall line trail is still subject to those same forces of water and foot traffic that can still prove destructive even to a fairly well-built rock staircase. I think a lot of the rocks that were initially part of the structure are downhill somewhere. But anyway, I'll move on to a discussion of what we'll cover in this presentation. I'll introduce the group to the concept of trail classification, just to drive home the point that there's a spectrum of trails and trail management decisions. And so not every trail needs the same treatment as the trail up to Nevada Falls at Yosemite, or, you know, maybe a popular trail up Mount Washington or Mount Monadnock. The bulk of this presentation will really be about those sort of technical specifications. That's about how a trail interacts with the landscape, and that's about just some of the numbers and terminology that we use in this field to specify what we aim to do and the problems that we face. And we'll talk a little bit about construction and maintenance tasks. For this group, we'll go into specifics about what we're going to do Sunday and next week at Wright Woods. So some objectives for this presentation. We'll talk about sustainable design principles. I hope that you'll leave this understanding what that means and how to identify and plan sustainable trails. And I hope that this knowledge is applicable. I hope that this isn't just theoretical. I hope that in your work throughout your communities, that I give you at least something to think about and then further to use. So about trail classification, to get us started, this trail classification is U.S. Forest Service jargon, going from trail classification 1 to trail classification 5. Trail classification 5 would be like the bike path along the Charles River, for example. It's a trail, but it's a paved trail that is ready to accept a whole lot of use in a very front country environment. Whereas, on the other end of the spectrum would be wilderness trails that require very little maintenance. And in fact, a light hand and little maintenance is part of the experience we would aim to facilitate on sort of a class 1 type trail. So this trail going up Mount Baldy in Bozeman, I feel like is a decent example of sort of a class 1 trail. And it's actually a trail that would not meet the low usage criteria. It gets a reasonable amount of use. But all the other criteria I feel like apply to this trail. And essentially the bottom line is that there would be no good reason to try to install infrastructure on this trail. This is probably just a herd path, a desire path. I really do enjoy the sort of sinusoidal. It's steeper than it looks. But this is probably just the result of the way people decided to go. And it perfectly suits this particular environment because of the durable surface, because of how well it drains, and also I think to a degree of the experience that the user is looking for. So all those factors would play into consideration. And so there's many trails within your networks that might be similar in that they don't get a lot of use, and so they don't need a lot of attention or infrastructure. Maybe you're willing to live with a few wet spots as opposed to build some big and garish structure. It wouldn't suit the trail classification. On the other end of the spectrum, this is from Grand Teton projects we worked on as part of the Jenny Lake renewal. This was really to get the trails in Teton to meet that higher standard because of the amount of use. And a lot of it had to do with the aesthetic as well, but really we had to accommodate two-way traffic. We had to make sure that people were using stairs, and people don't like using stairs, which is wild. But so those were and also the erosion was incredibly severe. The drainage was poor. So all of these criteria led us to management decisions to really have sort of a heavy hand. This was a very ambitious project. And so that's the spectrum of prescriptions that we could have in a trail work situation. And just to give you a sense of that spectrum, that it's not one size fits all. And so this was a good little template suggested to me by PowerPoint. Here are some standards, some ways that the standards might vary. We've covered many of these, but our management decisions and standards could vary based on any of these. Like the amount of water that falls from the sky here is a huge factor, as just one example. All right, one universal principle drawn on the back of a utility bill. Here we have, really, this is kind of the meat of it, and many of the subsequent slides will go through this. This is the one thing that I would like everybody to walk away with, is an understanding of how the trail's relationship to the land that it's on, from my perspective, from a management perspective, has so much to do with the grade that the trail is traversing and the grade that the trail takes. So top, we have a fall line aligned trail, which are very prevalent everywhere. And the trail profile is in the middle column. It's the same profile as a PVC pipe, or it's a drainage. It's just, unfortunately, also a trail. And so when we have a fall line aligned trail, we create this trench in which water gets on and cannot get off. And the reason that this trail is unsustainable is not only because soil starts going and it never comes back and it continues to go and go and go, but it's also because we install drainages on these trails, which take time. And then, in any mile of trail that's fall line aligned, you might need or prescribe or have already installed or inherited dozens of drains on just 1 mile of trail. And so you scale that out, and that's where it becomes sustainable. These drains require maintenance. So not only the time and effort to install these drains, but then to maintain these drains, it's just more work than we have the people to do the work. It's also designing these drainage features on a poorly aligned trail, much like that staircase that I showed you, is not foolproof either. The structures can fail under the same duress. So the fall line alignment is really, to me, one of the primary culprits in the management headaches that we have with trail networks. So a more sustainably aligned trail, the diagram to the bottom left is not particularly useful, but when the trail traverses the side slope, we would call this a trail that is designed with the contours. It's bench cut because you can see that it looks kind of like a bench. Erosion resistance, low maintenance, which we'll go over in some subsequent slides, and sustainable. So here's how a trail that is sustainably aligned would theoretically drain, which is the water hits the trail, but then it just keeps on going. That's what we want. And so here we have two different cases. And the right-hand side is the Appalachian Trail on the Webster Cliff Trail off of Route 302 near the Highland Center. And I find this picture fairly amazing, given how popular the Appalachian Trail is and how confined the impacts are in this right-hand picture. I don't see much soil loss at all. And the impacts are confined pretty well to a 24-inch treadway, which I find remarkable and testament to sustainably aligned trails. There's one feature I'd like to point out here in this right-hand picture, which will come up again and again. So on a fall line aligned trail, we have to install drainage ditches. But on a sustainably aligned trail, trying to find my mouse here, I'm not sure if you can see it, but yeah. So this is what we call a grade reversal. It might be hard to see, but it's hard to actually discern whether or not the trail's going up or down in this specific location, but it would appear that you go down a little bit and then you go up a little bit. And that's a grade reversal. It's simple, it's elegant. You could have got to point A, from point A to point B without this little dip. But what the dip does is ensure that as foot traffic compacts this trail, maybe you end up with a little bit of a trench in which water flows across, but does not continue because it ends up in that compacted treadway. And then it stays on the tread and starts flowing downhill. Well, the grade reversal just creates a low spot for the water to drain. It's no maintenance. It just takes some thoughtful design, or lucky, or both. One other interesting element in the right-hand photo, which will come up again in a few future slides, is the concept of an anchor, a downhill anchor. We call this rock in the foreground to the bottom right, and the three saplings up towards the back. They're right on the downhill side of the trail, and they act as a visual guide and a physical guide, but really more of a visual guide. I think people, they feel pulled in a direction. There's a little bit of a herding to it. You go where you're looking, and if you look at a gateway, we'll call it a gateway if there's a tree on either side, or an anchor when the tree's on just one. These visual guides can really help keep people staying on where you want them to be, which is on one 24-inch treadway, which sometimes can feel like a miracle when it's actually achieved. On the left, we have a fall line aligned trail. This is the old Iron Mountain Trail in Jackson, New Hampshire. We relocated this. This is often the solution that we employ, is rather than harden the surface and try to install rock steps. Like I said, we know that we're foolish to think that rock steps will last 100 years just because they're rock. You see this dramatic erosion that is waist high, 2-3 feet high. You try to put a rock staircase in there, you're crossing your fingers a little bit, and it's an incredible amount of skill and effort. So our solution was to take this 1/4 mile of fall line aligned trail and make it about twice as long and have it sustainably aligned across the side slope. So just so we know what we're talking about, the terminology, this is how we calculate grade. It's very simply rise over run. Be advised to not get confused between degrees and percentage. People sometimes will use them interchangeably, sometimes use them wrong. I try to only speak in terms of percentage, just to be clear. And so a 10% grade would be a rise of 10 feet over a run of 100 feet. In this case, in this diagram, that's the grade of the side slope, just to kind of keep hammering in these terms. And then you're looking at a running grade of the trail that traverses the side slope moderately, scarcely gains any grade, probably not more than 2 to 3% if we're just estimating. And we do see at least one nice little drainage dip, grade reversal in this illustration. So here's the half rule. The half rule is just a rule of thumb. There has been in the last 10, 15 years, some actual science about the relationship of running grade to the grade of the slope, the cross slope, side slope. But this half rule has been around for a long time as a rule of thumb, and I think it's a good rule of thumb. It's simply that if the grade of the trail exceeds half the grade of the landscape it's traversing, the side slope, then water will get on the trail and it won't get off. Whereas if we stay within the bounds of 1/2 or less, we're setting ourselves up for the water to drain off the trail. Some of the actual research that I've seen, it suggests it depends on the soil, it depends on the trail network, but especially in erosive soils, the half rule might not be enough in certain circumstances. And in certain circumstances, it's more than ample. But the key of the half rule to me is, and the kind of eye-opening thing that I've had in recent years, is that the half rule applies when your trail is only on a 10% grade or slope. So what I mean to say is that for me, it's instinctive to say, oh, this trail is really steep, so it must be bad. But if it's going over ground that is not steep, we have to take that into consideration. The trail has to be even less steep. And the trail we're working on in Wright Woods is a great example of this. You know, the road bed that we are aiming to relocate the trail away from is probably 10 to 15%, but it is straight up the fall line. And the erosion is, 3 to 4 feet deep in places. So that's the half rule. Any questions so far?
Matt, when you mentioned the soil, is the soil in Wright Woods prone to erosion?
Yeah, it doesn't look that bad. I've hiked around the Wright Woods and I have seen some pretty steep grades that are holding, and that's my rule of thumb for soil. I'm not a soil scientist, obviously. Is to walk your network and get familiar and look at what works and what doesn't.
Okay.
So we have to assume that this roadbed, could have been walked by Thoreau. So even though it has 3 to 4 feet of erosion, it's over a century. But it's still that same principle that it's not slowing, it's not stopping.
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem particularly erosion prone, that soil type, but when we're going straight up the fall line, we're still going to see it.
I'm assuming you're talking about sand or something of that nature that's a little bit more prone.
Yes.
Okay.
Sand would be the most, it's what you want is a good mixture of sand and clay. Those are the most erosion resistant soil types, but sandy and gravelly soil types are the ones that get washed away.
Thanks.
Yep, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I'll move on. Here's that same picture again. I think we've kind of covered all these principles. So I apologize for the low resolution. This is from the U.S. Forest Service Trail Maintenance Handbook, which has been a staple of a document for, I think, generations, at least for as long as I've been around. So just to get some basic terminology, this is the profile of a bench cut trail. This travel way thing, I've never heard anybody actually say those words, but it shows up in these publications a lot. what I really want to focus on is the back slope. The back slope is important when we're cutting bench trail. It's important that the back slope is not 90 degrees, because if you just cut it in, you're just focused on the treadway. I call the treadway this 24, 36, usually 24-inch treadway is the specification for where the feet are going to be, but it can be wider for skiing. It can be wider for other applications. You know, it can be wider if you have a lot of use and you want to accommodate two-way traffic. But if you just focus on cutting this treadway and you have a 90-degree angle here, then the back slope is just going to fall into the trail, and this slough will push hiker traffic off your trail and then create what's called trail creep, where the trail creeps down the slope. So we try to establish a 45-degree back slope if possible. If nothing else, we do try to maintain the back slope at as gradual a grade as we can accomplish. If the grade of the side slope is 50%, then we're going to have a hard time getting that back slope to 45 after we've cut our tread. But in Wright Woods, we'll have no issue maintaining this back slope to prevent slough from pushing hikers and creating what we call trail creep. You know, this berm is another, in Western environs, as hikers compact the center of the tread and a little bit of water and this and that, the berm will form, and sometimes it's a task to bust the berm. Just go through with a pick or a Pulaski and bust up that berm so that you can reestablish the outslope. So now we're getting into outslope versus inslope. Our bench cut trail profile should be roughly 2 to 3, 5% outsloped. I've never actually had a level in a tape measure or a clinometer or a protractor and tried to figure out. I have seen it done on surface trails. I've seen people cut jigs that represent, you know, X amount of outslope, but generally for natural surface trail construction, you can put a water bottle and see if the water's a little bit off, or like a McLeod. The only useful thing for a McLeod in the eastern environment, it's a tool with, it's almost like a tamper, in which the handle can stand straight up. So you're just looking for the handle to be, it's just a little bit outsloped. You can eye test it. You just want to be assured that water will continue in its path. The steeper the running grade, the steeper the outslope should be, which makes intuitive sense to me. That anyway, I don't want to get too bogged down in the technical stuff. There will be more slides and we'll continue to talk about this. So here's another slide that would demonstrate a 5% outslope. And again, I mean, you can like sculpt to this specification sometimes in Western environs that are a little bit sandier, but out here with the rocks and the roots, like, but here is a good example of, I think this is also from Webster Cliff. I worked there last year. It has that bench profile. It's going against the side slope. This is a slide that well demonstrates some downhill anchors and a little bit of gateway as well. The way that the trees help define the path, like a hallway almost. Yeah. So I feel, I was looking at this slide today and I feel like it would upset anybody who's scientifically inclined, because I have zero sources. I just stole this from a website called, I could provide the links to anybody who's interested, but the principle is the same. That as our trails relationship, the running grade of the trail starts to get within half and greater of the grade of the side slope, we see soil loss. And here is a example. This is again from the Blue Hills, a project I worked on 15 years ago. I think I set some of these rocks, and I'm sure that I set them in soil. You know, this is supposed to be a drain, a diversion of water on the uphill side of this photo. It's just, you know, the amount of erosion that this particular area gets is pretty shocking to come back after 15 years. This is fairly close to where my folks live, so I've checked in on this work over the 15 years, and it's a little bit shocking to see the erosion continue even when we've installed hardening and erosion control measures, because of the poor alignment, the soil type, and the massive amount of use. Again, hammering home those same principles. This one does get into soil a little bit. This slide I don't necessarily love because, you know, it says your maximum grade is 10%, but that doesn't take into account its relationship to the side slope. So really this slide is just meant to introduce the concept of soils and to talk about, you know, what I said in response to Kevin's question, which is my best understanding of soil science, which is that, you know, a mixture of sandy and clay type soils is the most erosion resistant. Ones on either end of that spectrum can prove problematic. The best way to assess your soil, if you have existing trails in the area, is to observe those trails. And you'll notice, like, oh man, we cannot get away with you know, even trails that are half, we're seeing erosion problems that are technically meeting the half rule. We might have to go down to a third. Whereas in other situations I've seen, oh wow, this trail is actually really handling some pretty steep grades. We could shoot this up to 20% in some places if we need to and feel pretty comfortable with it, as long as we incorporate grade reversals on the other side. I like this slide for, you know, a little bit of forensics if you're inclined to be on your trails and try to assess what's happening. It's really this deposition piece, which you will observe. You can just see the evidence of water running down your trail. You see disturbance of leaves, you see the deposition of fine sediments in low spots. Again, this is just the same principles kind of over and over again. I do like the trail profile visual. I think it's helpful. And you can see the relationship of the running grade and the side slope grade to erosion problems. And you can see how that is cyclical. You know, in the top fall line aligned trails, it only gets worse. And that's why it's unsustainable. So here's a beautiful, this is actually that same Mount Baldy trail, just much lower in Bozeman, going up the M, if you've been. And so, you know, here we would observe a fairly erosion resistant soil, although it is a little dusty and sandy. In rainy conditions, it becomes like clay and slippery. So I think it is that kind of mixture, I would just guess. But you can see it, I think I like this slide for a couple of reasons. It traverses the side slope. And also there's a really clear example of a drainage, a grade reversal right here. They can be really subtle, especially when you have such an even soil and earth to work with. You know, there's no rocks and roots there, which is crazy to us. So here's a picture from Grand Teton. This is demonstrating earth and berm drainage ditches or water bars. And this just demonstrates that as this trail, this trail was clearly, to me, I can see that this trail was clearly designed with some intention. Because as it makes an effort to go across the side slope, but of course, when it comes and turns and switches back, it has to cross the fall line. And as it approaches and then crosses the fall line, the amount of drainage ditches increases. Here in Teton, again, this up here is an excellent erosion resistant soil type. And we don't even need, you know, rock hardening or log hardening on the downhill side. Even when it gets steep, we can just rely on this soil to create earthen berms to divert the water off the trail. Really, this picture to me, as the trail gets steeper, the drainages get more frequent. So here's something from the Dicey's Mill Trail going up past a Conway. This is just a nice example of an earthen berm drain. I think this is a pretty A+ drain. So one thing we can highlight about this drainage is that it, well, I guess there's a few things on this slide. Firstly, I'm noting that I don't know that no, this trail does not meet the half rule, right? This trail is somewhat fall line aligned. I don't see a convincing side slope. And so it would make sense that we would have to install several drains because once water gets on this trail, it's not getting off, even though it is not that steep and the soil does look pretty good. you're still going to cause erosion over time, and you're still going to have structures that need consistent maintenance. But drainages are, sometimes the best option, and this is a very good one. It's well constructed for a number of reasons. It's not a trench. It's a nice gradual slope to the walls of the drain. We have some specifications I'll go over later about that. It's an earthen berm. There's not unnecessary rock in it, which I like. Why put rock in there if you don't need it? There are examples on this trail where I think you could probably get away without the rock there. And rock water bars, really, users hate them. Like, it's crazy. People in every subsequent footstep are just looking for the path of least resistance. It's wild. And so you really have to, if you're going to build a rock structure like this, the flat rocks in the middle are great, but I even wonder if over time, this was an excellent selection to build the rock water bar here, because this is what we would call a gargoyle that deters people from walking on the right-hand side. But I wonder if over time, these last three rocks were added to the left-hand side, because I wouldn't put it across people to have been going down and walking around this as gradual as these steps are. So it's just good to be aware of. I think you can get away without this one, but for what it is, I think it's pretty well designed and well built. So this is my favorite pun, is a cautionary trail, and I've encountered entirely too many of them. So this is from Cardigan, AMC property near Alexandria, New Hampshire. The AMC property is the base of Cardigan Mountain, which is not AMC property, but this is on AMC property. Oh, sorry. You really wouldn't think that this simple log water bar was too much of an ask for the user, but clearly the user has found a better way. And as foot traffic compacts soil, as water comes coursing down this trail, which again is fall line aligned, even if it's not steep, now water will take this compacted path that hikers have created. Some of it will go down the drain, but some of it will go around the drain, just like the people have. This drain was installed with a little pile of gargoyles to scare people away and try to keep them on the tread. And it really boggles my mind. Like, this is not that much of an ask to just step over this log. It feels like it would be harder to go this way, but the people have spoken. And so that's why sustainably graded trails, if we can eliminate the need for these structures, it solves a lot of problems at the same time for us. So here's, again, pulled from that Forest Service handbook. I apologize for the poor resolution on the left-hand side. Just some diagrams about water bar specifications. These diagrams have been around as long as I've been in the field. And I think that rock water bar design is getting a little bit dated because of the challenges that I've outlined. But in the left-hand photo, I would just focus on the two shovel width. We'll use at Wright Woods a pickmatic. I wish I had one here at my house, but it's a pick, like the prospectors, the gold diggers would have a pick, but on one side it's a pick, on one side it's a matic. It's a 5-pound head, it's a stout tool, but the slope of the pickmatic and the width of the pickmatic is perfect for the slope and width of a drainage ditch. Two shovel widths out here in New England is a little more work than I feel like you want to do, because that second shovel width, who knows what rocks and roots you'll run into. But the bottom line is maybe a little bit wider than you might initially think for a drainage ditch, because soil is going to come in from the sides. You want water to sheet and not channel. So we like to get them nice and wide and nice and gradual. In addition, that 45-degree angle is kind of a classic specification, because when water takes a turn, it slows down. If the angle were more like 90, then it would just churn right into our drainage structure and undermine it. And were it steeper or less steep than 45, more obtuse, then it wouldn't slow down, and that rushing water might channel out our water bar. 45 is about right.
Matt?
Yeah.
And then on the outslope side of that, Is your drainage just kind of right there, or does it extend into the outslope?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, these diagrams are fairly dated, and if you're installing drains, you probably don't have an outslope. You probably have this kind of a profile. And so I think the outslope really just is establishing the obvious that your drain should be going consistently downhill, right? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that works.
We do talk about like a drain pan, a little bit of a swale that's kind of shaped like an apostrophe. So we, just again, to try to coach the water a little bit, but these diagrams are a little bit dated, honestly. We'll move on. So here we'll get into the specifics of what we're aiming to accomplish at Wright Woods over the next, next week. So we have that old section of the red trail, which is on that historic, that old roadbed, I should say. And so I'll go over in the next slides some techniques to, if we're going to close that trail, it's eroded and gullied to the point where the same problems with, even if we move people off of it, it will still serve as a drainage unless we mitigate that. So we're going to try to mitigate that, and I'll go into how. We'll build a new trail that we feel like will meet sustainable trail criteria, as in it will go across the side slope. We have some nice side slope to work with. So it should be a good opportunity to build some good trail there. And then on the existing paths around that junction, there are some spots where we can kick in a few good drains. We're seeing kind of from all directions, this one area has got a lot of impact, and that impact is clearly due to a lot of water that's coming down multiple trails. So we want to get the water off of those trails where we can before it gets to this junction. So these are our sort of three of our missions for the work that we'll accomplish. So here's just for those of you who may not know, the pick and the Pulaski for New England trail work are my two go-to tools. It's depressing how hard it is to use a shovel in some of the places that we work because of the rocks and the roots. The Pulaski is great because this is the Pulaski that looks like an axe. Legend has it that a wildland fighter named Pulaski took his double bit axe and forged it in the fire and twisted one end of it to create the Pulaski. So one side of it is grubbing and the other side of it is like an axe. The benefit of the Pulaski over the pick is it's lightweight for grubbing. You can really kind of move quickly and just like grub small stuff. And the pick is a 5-pound head. The Pulaski's 3, I think. And that makes a difference when you're swinging it over and over again. And also you can just flip the Pulaski around and chop out some larger roots. I also like those cheap Corona hand saws for roots. You don't mind putting them in the dirt. Loppers can be good for roots as well. The pick is heavy enough that it can just break. It can bludgeon and break roots. The pick is great for prying out rocks. So those two tools will get a lot of the job done for us. Loppers and hand saws will help us to clear vegetation, as well as maybe tackle some roots. And this McLeod is a total staple of Western trail work and is not, it's hard to make it work out here. I think they're gathering dust in a lot of tool sheds around the Northeast. So those are some tools that we'll use. So these are some visuals for what to expect for decommissioning a trail. First of all, the soil on this trail is going to be very compacted. And so we want to loosen the soil, which might be counterintuitive because if we're loosening the soil, we're going to make it more prone to erosion. That's why we would install these check dams. The nice thing about these check dams is that we don't have to install them to hiker specification. So finding dead and down, chunky dead and down stuff is going to be really good. And of course, the road bed that we're going to aim to decommission is significantly wider than what's pictured here. So we're probably looking at 4 to 6 foot chunks of wood we'll be trying to install as erosion check dams. I'll probably bring a chainsaw just for chopping those up. Hopefully we can find the right material, which I think we can. I know we can. So turning up the soil, installing erosion check dams, and then an opportunity for those who have green thumbs, we can replant or transplant saplings and plants that we, the smaller pine trees typically work pretty well for this. And they're kind of abundant in the area. So I think there's a lot of good opportunities potentially to transplant, especially as we're clearing our new trail corridor. Any small evergreen saplings we'll try to preserve and transplant in the old trail bed. And then the last step is just to kind of put a bunch of debris in there for 2 reasons. Debris will slow down water. Just debris resting on the ground will slow down water, and it will also deter hikers from using the old path. So that's kind of our 3-part approach to decommissioning the old trail. So establishing the new trail, this is that same Iron Mountain trail that we built last year. And I think this picture really well demonstrates the light hand that we want to take. Here in New England, if we try to go down to mineral soil, sometimes, we would end up digging a trench because there's so much organic and duffy material on that top layer. We remove the organicest and duffiest of it, and we flatten out the surface, but we let the user burn in the tread, and that works. This is tried and true over 15 years at least here in the White Mountains. I think at Wright Woods we might actually start finding some good soil sooner than in this particular photo, but I have gone back and visited this trail, and just the foot traffic alone kind of does burn out some of that organic material and leave you with a better tread than if you had tried to excavate down to that mineral soil, or worse, gone through the labor of trying to import it from somewhere else. So it's just to emphasize that when we're doing this, there might be a lot of energy and excitement, but I think of it like coats of paint. Do a pass and do it light, and then step back and see where you might want to remove a little bit more, which will lead me to my next slide. I'm not sure if this picture represents a finished product. I mean, to me, it doesn't. And I would just hope that we gave a few more finishing touches to this particular tread. And especially on Wright Woods, where we might expect some cross-country skier traffic, maybe some horse traffic, we would definitely want a wider treadway than this. This does not meet the 24-inch specification. And you also see what I was talking about on the, we call where the treadway meets the back slope, we call this the hinge. And so that's a really useful term. That's what Jane and I roughly flagged was the hinge, which is intuitive because you'll put your grubbing tool right into the hinge and then start pulling material back. So that'll establish that uphill side of the tread. But this back slope could use a little bit of work to prevent sloughing in the future. And the tread could probably be made to go a little bit wider. Maybe this rock could be removed. It's kind of right here. So I would take this as a trail in progress. And I think this is a good approach, is again, do a first pass, step back, and then see what needs to happen next. So just to go into the details of, we do have multiple drains to construct. Just want to give a little bit of instruction. Any organic material like leaves and organic soil, that top layer, the black soil, is not useful as fill material. It's not useful as tread material. So we broadcast that. Just kind of pitch it into the woods. We don't want to leave piles of that. We just kind of let it broadcast. once you get down to good mineral soil, don't broadcast that. You can always find a use for it. And the first use would be to build up the berm on the downhill side. You see the 45-degree angle on this particular drain, looks good. And then in terms of the end, when you're digging a drain, it's, sometimes the terrain, the topography is not necessarily working with you, but you don't want to just have a drain that ends at a wall or an uphill slope. That's just going to backfill with sediment that much more quickly. So ideally, you would like to just transition from your excavated drain to the natural forest floor. And kind of just fan it out, feather it, make a nice transition at the end. In terms of how far your outflow ditch should go, the answer is far enough. If you're going onto a very steep, if you're building your trail across a steep side slope, 45, 50 degrees, and you are installing drains, which you probably don't even need, you wouldn't need much outflow at all. But in this instance, probably calls for 6 to 10 feet of outflow just to get to that point where you can transition it onto the forest floor. So here's some specifications for removing vegetation. And I like this. This is AMC proprietary. It's actually from BCT Materials, the Bay Circuit Trail. I like that this allows for different specifications for different user groups. We see those different specifications for skiing and horseback. Obviously, the rider of a horse is taller than they are when they're not on a horse, and a skier, we should hope, is on feet of snow, and so they are higher up. Also, skiers need a little bit more maneuverability to make turns and whatnot, so we tend to go a little bit wider for the skier, as well as a horse has a wider profile. Out west, we account for pack stock being even wider. But generally, I talk about a 4x8 sheet of plywood as if you're holding it and you're trying to walk down the trail. You should be able to hold a 4x8 sheet of plywood and have it not touch anything as you walk down a cleared corridor. But you don't want that to be obvious. And that's because when you remove a branch, so if the plywood hits the branch, you grab the branch and then you follow it to wherever it begins, and you remove it wherever it begins. So you're not cutting it off strictly at the 4 feet, and you're not creating a artificial looking rectangle in the forest. You're taking each individual piece of vegetation and tracing it back to either, if it's a small tree or a small piece of shrubbery, the ground, cutting it flush with the ground, or if it's a branch, you're following that branch back to the tree trunk, or in some cases like a prominent, fork or whatever the word is. So that's the most important thing, is you don't want to leave stobs, like just a 3-inch sharp branch just poking out of a tree. It looks really bad. So we want to cut our branches flush to the tree trunk or flush to the ground. I had a supervisor in Yosemite who would suggest you don't leave Charlie Brown Christmas trees. So if you've got a small tree and you end up having to remove half the branches of the tree because they're in the corridor, well, you should probably just remove the whole tree. And this is for small trees that are pictured here. Obviously, we wouldn't want to unnecessarily remove any mature trees. As trees get mature, their branches are up higher. So generally, they clear the corridor a little bit easier. And so these pictures demonstrate what I'm talking about, that these branches that come into the corridor are removed at the base and pictured as a saw through that where the branch meets the trunk. And then as we are brushing out, we call this brushing out, as we're clearing the corridor, we'll take that vegetation, those small trees, and it will come in handy for brushing in the old trail. So brushing out is when we clear the corridor. Brushing in is when we take woody debris and try to cover up somewhere that we don't want people to hike. So we will brush out to brush in. That's it. that's everything I wanted you guys to know in advance of our work next week. I'm really looking forward to it. Grateful for your audience, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Matt. That was really good. There's a lot of information to take in.
Yeah, like I said, it is a, there are lots of technical specifications that govern the decisions we make.
Matt, I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. This is Meg. I'm sorry I arrived a couple minutes late, but did you offer a map of where in Wright Woods we'll be working on Sunday?
No.
Okay.
The short answer is no. Jane?
Yeah, I might be able to pull one up.
I can let you screen share.
Yeah.
One concern that I think is somewhat arbitrary in decision making is how to sign a trail, how to mark a trail, how to tell people what's going on with the trail. And there have been multiple options that I've seen in applications, but one of the most recent choices seems to be using a lot of marks, and I wonder what led us to that, and how is it likely to be a stable choice for the future.
I think what led us to that in general are squeaky wheels. But every land managing entity, this is again trail classification. You're absolutely right. It's arbitrary, and standards vary greatly depending on the user group and the experience that we want to facilitate. I think for every person that might feel lost in the woods, there's a person that can feel barraged by information by a kiosk every 200 feet. And so those are conversations to happen in local communities, and with land managing organizations and agencies. I like to, I think it may be apparent that I like the lighter hand, but at the same time, if I'm in a new and unfamiliar place, it can be nice to have, a "you are here" at every junction. So, but nowadays with the smartphone, it's kind of like it's your own fault if you're getting lost.
Okay, I found a map here. Okay, so this is the red trail here, and we'll kind of be working just above where this little trail is feeding in. I think it kind of starts here and follows down through here, and then there's this junction area that Matt referenced where there's a lot's been kind of happening in there, and we'll look to remedy a little bit of that. And then the trail continues in here, and there's a pretty decent sized gully in here, but people have already been circumventing that and created a trail on the water side. And so I think we're going to continue with that and then close in this section of trail. So we'll kind of close here, and then we'll be moving this trail. We'll kind of cut in up here and drop back down to the junction here, and then we'll walk along here and then cut back in and join the trail there. If people can see my cursor, I hope. Okay. No?
Yeah, I can see that cursor. So what is the access point for that one?
What do you mean by access point?
So you're going in through that dirt road near Walden, right, by Fairhaven Bay.
Yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying. So there's a couple of ways. So if you're coming in through from Arena Terrace where there's parking, and you follow the white trail that parallels the gravel road,
Yes.
down, then when you reach this junction here and look across, you can come and cut down onto the red trail, and the blue trail is also there. They kind of make a Y, and that's where the red trail is. Or if you're coming from Walden through
Mhm.
Adams Woods and along the Andromeda Pond section, excuse me, then you will come up onto the trail here, and this is where that junction is.
Gotcha.
Or you can be obviously coming from, the boathouse and overlook side of things up this
Right.
way. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. And you guys will send out probably an email about where to meet,
Yes.
maybe? Okay.
Yeah.
I think I know where that is, but I know better than to trust myself too much.
Yeah. In fact, I'll probably take this map and draw on it and send that out just to make it really clear.
Great. That's perfect.
Any other questions? We're ready to go. Put us to work.
Thank you. It was interesting to learn all about it. I really appreciate it, Matt.
Thank you.